I am going to have a conversation with you about risk analytics, and the main point is here, related to introduce a discipline that we need to work more in the developing of ideas for connecting what we are doing in actuarial science, what we are doing in quantitative finance, what we are doing in analytics, and what we are doing in general in business. Because the problem that I am going to show you is that risk analytics is not only for people working in the financial sector. It's in general for any industry. And that is something that is growing and growing in applications of analytics. That means I have some points to share with you. It's a brief introduction, what I mean by risk analytics, something in terms of the capabilities that we need to improve in risk analytics, what can we do in general in risk analytics, and some components of the control. Basically, the problem with the risk analytics is related to having a process that is with many steps, and we need to understand that the process in analytics is going to help us in the risk management processes itself. The other thing is that we need to understand how we are going to support the current and future smart organizations, because the problem that we have in organizations these days is that they are evolving based on analytics, but they are increasing the exposure to several different risks. That means, in general, what is the idea in terms of risk management and data analytics processes? This is probably the core of the idea. Everything that is totally unknown or totally based on the uncertainty is a problem that is generally a continuous. That means what we are trying to do is to try to know more what are the things that we are able to control and to review. For example, when we know the probability distributions, we are closer to here, but when we are in something that is totally uncertainty, we are in trouble. Companies at the end have a big trouble in moving in this continuous system. And for example, something that is happening with the presentation this morning in the way to work together in analytics. In analytics is a collaborative work. We have an interdisciplinary thing. But one of the things that we are seeing is that we have bottlenecks. That means you cannot have only one department in big corporations where analytics is solving everything. You need is to start having a combination of centralization and decentralization. And this is the kind of things that create another type of risk. That means for me, the concept is that we have, in general, in risk as the business and risk as the name of the game. That means, in general, what we have is everything that we are doing in business is managing risk. That means, at the end, everything that is related to performance, what we are trying to do is to try to move from the conditions that are status quo to something that is better in terms of improving our performance. But every time that we are moving, we are creating some kind of exposure, and the risk in the middle is something that we need to take care of. The other thing is in terms of the way that we need to develop mitigators, how we are going to employ our knowledge in order to develop mitigators. Analytics is a source of creating knowledge. And the way that we are creating knowledge is going to be in application to solve new problems, but one of the problems that we are trying to solve is to manage the variation of the results. And that is risk. Okay? And the other thing is, as Randy said some minutes ago in his presentation, the problem is at the end how we are involving analytics with the strategy and how the strategy could have the big impact that we are expecting. Because most of the cases, the problem with the strategy is not in the formulation of the strategy. We have beautiful strategies. The only thing is, in terms of the implementation, the risks are low. That means implementation is a big piece of the problem. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is that risk is not only for the financial organizations. That means every organization in different areas, in different sections, in different types of products, different types of markets, they have a kind of work that is related to risk analytics. Why? Because they have every time events that are going to change what they are doing, and what they are looking for in management is to try to figure out what the results will be. Because at the end, if we have a goal that is 10% in growth, the 10% in growth is not really a target that we are going to have exactly. What we are going to measure at the end is the variance and the confidence intervals close to the 10%, in order to know if we are going to do the things to be closer to the goal. And the other thing is in terms the way that we need to assess and to quantify risk. Because the issue is not only to identify the risk, the problem is going to be how to quantify them. The other thing is how we are going to manage the models and the results in terms of creating interpretation from them. Because as we know, we can have wonderful models, but the wonderful models at the end with the results are not possible to understand for certain people. At the end, we are not going to use, and people are going to put in the garbage bin. The other thing is something that is important these days is the integral view. And we talk about integrity in data, but at the same time, integral data, all these kind of things. But the issue for that, in our case, is that we are having issues in risk that is related, for example, to operational risk. And that is part of what we need to understand here. I put these two elements. The risk management process, and you see how the analytics process is going to help each of the steps. That means here the risk management process is risk identification, evaluation, acceptance, tolerance, simulation, and everything that is related to the quantification. And here, when you have the analytics process, you need to describe, yes, the data, diagnosis, prediction, prescription, controlling, all these kind of things. All of them are going to help each of the components of the process. It doesn't matter if it's financial or not, because if you are in production, you are having exactly the same problem. Manufacturing these days is having big troubles because they are trying to compete with automation. That means they are trying to go in the direction of moving from something that is manual to something that is more automated, that is more digital, and they have a lot of work to do. I remember in one of the cases that I had to solve, it was with the paper mill here in WhatsApp, and what they had is the typical chemical engineering working with the mindset that they had forever in the paper mill, but predictive analytics was fantastic for them. Why? Because our brain doesn't work putting all the variables together at the same time and to try to identify some factors that are influencing the quality of the product. For them, it was fantastic to see all the variables that they had at the same time and to see how these factors could affect the quality. And for me, as a person working in that, it was difficult to try to understand the knowledge domain. Because I had to understand what is the paper mill at the end, and it's something that is complicated for me to understand. That means, in general, we need some capabilities. The capabilities at the end can be in any type of data. That means it could be big, it could be regular data, but we need to start reviewing what are the specific risks that we want. And remember, risk for this specific talk is more about the variance. It's more about how the results are moving from the target, okay? And here we need to start thinking what is with the risk steps that we have in the process are the capacities and the capabilities that we are going to create in order to support the specific risk. I will give you an example of what I want in the future and to continue here in the university to move in risk analytics. The first book that we have in operational risk came from an actuary. Henry Panger wrote a book. He's one of our Canadian very good actuaries. He wrote a book in operational risk, and it was amazing. What was amazing? The property and casualty models that we use in general insurance, we use in where? In operational risk. And sometimes the issue is that we don't explore how the analytics capacity is there. The only thing is we are not taking advantage of the models. I have a typical example in this. The Brownian motion, in terms of stochastic models, we had this at the beginning of the 19th century. Einstein used it at the beginning of the 20th century when he wrote the thesis, he worked with something very specific in Brownian motion. Guess what? Black-Scholes was in the 70s. That means it's easily around 150 years to take the advantage of some modeling processes. And we have this very common. Here, something that is, we need people in risk analytics. Who are taking the value of the risk analytics these days? People in audit. Because enterprise risk management is these days close to there. But at the same time, in the actuarial society, we have something that is in enterprise risk management. And the other problem is to create a strategic intelligence. What is strategic intelligence at the end? To be smarter is more to be adaptable. And adaptable means to have the capacity to move in the direction where the risk is controllable. Because if not, what we are doing every time is to be managing the things in the world that is pure uncertainty. That means there are different definitions. I can go very fast, but what is the definition? The definition of the uncertainty in the world, however, is expressed sometimes in terms of the probabilities, but something that I would like to show you is how managers are seeing risk. This is interesting. However, for managers, the meaning of risk is more related to the concept of loss, and there is no clear identification of positive changes. Excuse me. What is happening? Risk is on the positive side as well. I am teaching my students every time, what is the last bankruptcy announcement? Do you know what? What is the reason? What are the things? Because every time, last week was Forever 21. Last week was another 5 more. And they were successful during many years. One of the examples that I put them every time is, who was the Amazon during the 20th century? And people, oh no, how can we have Amazon in the 20th century? Sears. They had all the technology and the capacity that we call these days supply chain management and everything, but disappeared. Not yet totally, but it's amazing. And that is the kind of things that we need to see, because the problem in risk is not only on the negative. The problem in risk is in not identifying how and why you are good. Because you are not able to identify. In Canada, we have, for example, Trim, you know, the cell phones were with the technology and everything for moving ahead, but at the end, other brand names put them out of the market. The same happening with others, IKEA, Nokia as well. This is the problem. The problem for us is to keep in mind that in many cases the models are important. Yes, stress testing can be important. However, the problem that we need is too many variables in risk analytics. For example, one of the questions this morning to Jeff was, what is the variation of the results if you change the target? And that is a typical question in analytics. What could happen if you change the definition of the target? Something that is good, something is bad. But if something is good for me as a company A, and then probably is not very good for the company B. That means these type of things are going to create some tweaks in the way that we create analytics. Other things, we need to create more data products. What is the meaning of data products? These days, not more just having reports in paper, because people are looking for more the results presented in Markdown, for example. Why? Because they are trying to show how the dynamic of the market, the dynamic of the variables are changing, and it's possible for them to visualize what is happening with risk, how they are moving according to the targets. The other thing is the combination of traditional risk theory with computational solution. That is the reason that we have the big mix between statistical and machine learning. Because what we are trying to do is, you can have the traditional solutions, but the other problem is sometimes with the traditional solutions you don't have enough information for making some decisions, and people use other approaches. But what is complicated these days is that in Python we have more than 100,000 packages. In R we have more than 40,000. That means if you go to the list, The complexity now is not to understand the statistics of machine learning. The problem and complexity for me right now is what are the algorithms that I am going to select in the 100,000 that I have in the packages. That means complexity is changing. You understand? And we are exposed to this kind of thing. That means, in general, there are many points. I will go a little further with this, is because we have the traditional approaches in terms of measuring things in portfolios. However, the issue for us is how we are going to manage the results and the models. The models can be sophisticated, the models can be very simple. The only thing is, one purpose is to try to understand what the outcome of the companies will be and how the variation of the outcomes will be. And that is exactly what I have here. Goals, metrics, and dimensions. Very simple. Start with the goals. What are the things that people are looking for? What are the metrics for people measuring what is happening? And one error that is very common is that people don't understand what the dimensions of the metrics are. What is the analytics at the end? At the end, my analytics is a measurement system, creating metrics. The only thing is when you are going to implement the metrics have to be with dimensions. Because you need to understand where you are. If you are in different times, in different locations, and these type of things start being very important to us. And I put this in this way. What is the way to create risk analytics? The way to create risk analytics is that you are going to have strategic objectives. It would be in profit, sales, and any kind of things. But this is the methodology. That means you need to identify potential risks, key performance indicators, and key risk indicators, relationships among them, the data that you are going to use, the models that you need to study, and how you are going to manage these answers of the strategic problems, and how you are going to manage the events. And that is something that is repeatable every time. But most of the cases that I have observed, people just go to the strategic objective, they define some key performance indicators, but they forget the most important is the variations of the key performance indicators. And key performance indicators is risk, the variation, okay? That means, in general, what is happening, and I have this example, is look what people are doing. People are trying to go from the financial and non-financial risk identification, they go to the management tools, they go to the risk appetite, and finally, they go to the risk governance. And what is that, for example, in terms of risk appetite? They are other cycles. What is the cycle? Risk capacity, risk appetite statement, risk appetite metrics, roles and responsibilities. That means part of what Randy was saying is you have the translators for data science. Yes, very important. But how you are going to implement the things even with the translator? Basically, as you see here, is a combination of qualitative and quantitative things. And that is part of the risk analytics process. What can we do? You have many options. You have to combine qualitative things and quantitative things. You can have something that is coming from the risk balance scorecard, something in typical scenarios. But here, for example, this is very interesting. It's very difficult for me to work with the students sometimes to show them, hey, yes, it's great to have a scenario. You are going to have 5 different sample points, and you are going to change the sample points and you are going to put them in something that is a small simulation in Excel. But why it's so difficult? It's because people don't understand that when you are changing the parameters, you need to understand more about the distribution of the variable. You need to understand that probably what you need is not only 5 cases, you need is hundreds and thousands or millions of cases. For example, the Professor Daniel Bauer is going to talk in a few minutes about Monte Carlo simulation in risk. And this is part of the problem. Sometimes people are only here, and they need to go to different other tools. Why? Portfolio treatment. Companies' portfolio is for everything. You have portfolios of products, you have portfolios of markets, you have portfolios of investment, all this kind of thing. And guess what? The methodology is the same. The Markovitch model that is in 1953 is exactly the same, possible to use. The only thing we need is to identify what are the metrics that we are using in each of the cases. If it's something that is investment, it's something that is in the market. stock value, something that is the same. Risk theory adaptation, something that, for example, Fanda was talking about how to use it in insurance. It's possible to adapt to the markets because, for example, the compound Poisson model. The compound Poisson model is always in the literature of stochastic models. Then in insurance was used in actuarial science. But we are able to use as well in our commercial and retail models because the severity is related to how much people are going to buy. And the frequency is how many people are visiting our stores. And this kind of things is what we are looking for. Economic capital, real options. And this, for example, this is the optimization. That is prescriptive analytics. Okay, but how you are going to work with new methodologies? Because the problem for us is to try to adapt the methodologies that we're using in another context, in the context for general organizations. Simulation, I talked, or mix. The mix, for example, that is typical is Markov chains, because you are interested in how, what is the probability of moving from one strategic group to another strategic group. Put it in simple things. That means you can have metrics like this. How is the comparison, just scatter plots and to try to understand how different variables are affecting something that is we call the general aggregated metric in risk, that is, for example, market risk versus firm risk, and we decided how to operate with that as a ratio of the standard deviation of the sales and the standard deviation of the return. That means metrics is a problem that we have to solve. And in most of the cases, each company is going to solve their own metrics. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is the consistency, because you are going to compare probability time series. The other thing is you are going to have the identification of the source of risk, you are going to identify the distributions of each of the risks, then you are going to combine them, that is a big problem, and the measure of the required capital in case that you are looking for that. Or you create some kind of views of the portfolios, and these days one of the most important metrics that we are using is how this company is moving from one place to another, and the movement from one place to another is the measure of risk. It's more on the traditional trigonometric that we use. This is an example that I made some years ago that is about exposure management, because as you heard, I have had my own practice as a company, and this was a beautiful work for a company, because we had here everything that is the map of exposure. Map of exposure means that I have something in units, I have something in dollars, I have something in terms of expected loss, I have something in terms of the levels of risk of the portfolios, and many other elements, for example, in terms of the markets. Additionally, I could compare each of one in terms of the expected loss versus exposure, and how the premiums could be sufficient or not in terms of what I was measuring. But what was beautiful behind of this type of solution is that I could control is the thresholds. And what people could see, it was something very simple, not with complex formulas. It's just to say, hey, give me this as one big shot of what is happening now, and show me how the thresholds can modify the map. Because in terms of that, you have models telling you what the premiums could be for supporting the total risk that you are accepting. And this is a kind of solution that is very important to have. Here there is another example that is more to create indexes. The problem in risk analytics is not only to see one thing once, it's to see how the trends are and how you are seeing windows and different cohorts of the data in order to see how the variation has been controlled. And that is example. This is very interesting thing that I put it with Canada and the US. When we are going together, we are going together in the goods and the bads too. And the other thing is when you are going to have so many complicated metrics, because RAROC is really a full ecosystem. You have many things. And the basic concept was based on the VAR and based on the T-VAR. That means the only thing is, instead of having only the measure of the regular equity, you need to include the randomness in order to say, hey, one moment, you don't have only the money that you put the first time. You need to have the money when the variations of the market are requiring more money from you. And that is not a problem only in the financial sector, it's a problem of all of our companies. Because if you are not prepared, you don't know if the stockholders are going to put the money that you need. There are many other things that are related to the connections, because the problem is related to the correlations, because we had a conversation with the fund today, and at the same time you have different types of distribution and how you are going to modify or help the general decision-making process based on the understanding of this distribution. There is another thing that is very interesting. We have ruined theory in risk theory in general in insurance and in actuarial science, but something that is interesting is how you connect this with bankruptcy theory. I remember one actuary some years ago, are you able to give me the probability of any kind of event? Yes, I can do it, because I can create my logistic regression or something and to give the probability of the events. Or if not, they can input and to see how, in terms of some simulations, they can use it. Real options, that is another option for us to work with. And at the same time, I like this very much, is in terms of indicators. What? Productivity. What productivity, but with optimization, because productivity is a problem of optimization. And what we are trying to do is data envelopment analysis, and in that case, it's fantastic. One example that I did with this was the accounts payables in Canada. I remember it was fantastic. Trying to understand who is the most productive agency in the government in order to pay millions of the bills that they had. And the results were very interesting to see who. The other thing is, in terms of Markov chains, is the metrics of how you are moving from one period to another and when you are aware of the changes. Here is another thing that I mentioned already, products, regions, all of them are ways to see, in general, the portfolios. In terms of modeling, there are a lot of things that you can do with simulations. You are able to do many things in terms of managing variables and input. One of the open questions that we have these days is causality. We are trying to do not only causality from the point of view of the concepts related to econometrics. We are trying to do more from biostatistics, for example. They are very advanced, and they are doing something different. Correlations, copulas, all these kind of things that you are able to do. Multiple regression, but when you have simulation with multiple regression, is another way to improve your risk analytics. And finally, something that I put already emphasis on causality, and something in scraping data or bringing some of the different sources of data to be able to use. And in the practice, you are having risk analytics in smart cities, transformation, infrastructure, payments, all these kind of things these days are huge to analyze. Business, you are having, this morning when I opened the session, I talk about the commodities, our jobs. One of the problems, for example, underwriting can be a commodity. Even professors, I told you, could be a commodity. That means, in that regard, we need to be prepared how we are going to support with our type of modeling and things very well. Finally, I have to give you these important things, that is the problem of conceptualization. That means we call it sometimes idealization. This is something that is a very interesting case, that is the collateralized debt obligations, that was part of the crisis, and it was a problem of assumptions, and it's a problem of assumptions. Why? Because they believe that the markets were not correlated, and based on that they had the catastrophe of the tranches that they created. I have a new article that was published just in the Journal of Business Analytics of the Operational Research Society, and it's about the remedies of bias, something that is for you probably interesting. Finally, there are many elements related to the creation of actions and value, and how you are going to report the interactions among company members, how you are going to give the priorities, etc. That means, in general, remember this: the name of the game for everything in the organization is risk. That means you have risk analytics about supporting risk management, practice using analytics and artificial intelligence. Risk analytics is a way of thinking and acting to improve organization's performance, and risk analytics is for all organizations and in all areas of management. This is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you. Questions?
If we have questions for Professor Rodriguez, I'd ask you to maybe just do it in the hallway while we get set up for our next presenter.
Okay.
And making sure that we get the product up and running to support Starlink manufacture.
Great.
Oh, yeah. Still keyed in.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got all the personal lines. Yeah.
Say it again?
Flight technology goals. What that means.
Yeah, a bunch of things about it. You still have lunch like a couple times a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like it's with biology too, right? Yeah, I don't buy there, which class.
I did 41 years, so.
That's just one of many.
Yeah, so I started in filing gynecology and ended up doing standardized codes and deal
Oh,
operations.
the one together with the other.
So, and Waterway is with the school.
Okay, so there's lots of opportunities.
Look at that, you have this, you have this.
Yeah.
With the other.
You're gonna stay here?
So yeah, I'm involved with the things that our master of sciences.
Yeah. No, you guys are. Madison has this new master's.